let's go ahead and get started on the front suspension. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and install the ball sockets. So this is a 3mm thick piece of carbon fiber. So we're going to use the taller hats, or the ball sockets. Let me find this other one. Okay, so we've got all four. We want to put the larger hat portion on these two outer holes here. The larger hat goes opposite of the countersinks. Okay, so that moves nice and free. So then we can put this other side on. Each kit should come with spares, so don't be afraid to mess up. It is a bit tricky to kind of get this process down. Once you get the feel for it, they go in pretty easy. So the large part of the hat is opposite of the countersinks. And then for the center two here, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to put the large hat on the same side as the countersinks. Okay. And large hat on the same side as the countersinks for this guy. Cool. So those are all of our ball sockets installed. So then we're going to install the balls themselves. The front suspension uses non-threaded balls. So there should be 4 non-threaded balls for these 4 ball sockets. To install these, I like to grab a piece of metal and with the large hat facing down towards the metal, push down and install. Just like that. So we repeat this process for all 4. And for this final one, there you go. Okay, so all of the pivot balls are in their sockets. All the sockets are in the appropriate holes, and all of these balls are fairly free in their socket. Next, we can go ahead and install the, we can install the servo. So each kit comes with a Baton D135F metal gear ball bearing servo. This has been a great servo. It's really cost effective. It's fast. We've run it both on carpet and on asphalt with very, very good success. This piece is your servo mount. Notice that there is a slit in the front. The wire is going to go through the middle. You want the exit of the wiring to face towards the slit. And you're going to slide these two together until they're seated like this. Similarly, you're going to take the lower arm with the countersinking facing down. You're going to feed the wire into the hole and place the servo in like so. To mount the servo onto the lower arm, you're going to use these 4 button head screws. They are M3x16. So you're going to go ahead and push these into all 4 holes. To secure and tighten everything down, we're going to use M3 lock nuts. So now all 4 of those screws are exposed through the bottom. And then I like to go and get these screws started. So once they're started, like they're fine on there. They're not going to go anywhere. For the front one, it's a bit tougher because the wire is sort of in the way. And again, these screws rarely ever come out. So once this is kind of done, that's pretty much it for these guys. I have an open-end wrench that has a 5.5 millimeter opening, so I like to grab that guy and to tighten these guys down. Cool. All right, so steering servo is installed on the lower arm. And just keep in mind, you want this guy to be free. You don't want it to be pinched underneath the nuts or anything. So for the servo horn, there's a couple steps we have to go through. This insert here is 25 tooth. This servo horn is, the spline is 23 tooth. So we have to pull this insert out. So you just want to grab under the hat and pull, and then this insert will come up. There's two other little hats with different splines. One is 23, one is 24 tooth. I don't know which one of these fits. That guy fit really well, so we're gonna go with that guy. So the extra one can just be set aside. That was the first step of the servo saver install. The second step is getting the threaded balls on. So we're gonna grab 2 M3x6 button heads and 2 threaded balls, and we're going to install those to the outer forwardmost holes. And we're going to grab some Loctite for these guys as well. I'm leaving these a little loose just to make sure I can go back and hand tighten everything. One final tighten. Cool. So this guy is now ready to install on the servo. So we can go ahead and push this down over the spline that we've already installed. One quick check we can do is to see if the servo throw is pretty close, so we can turn the servo all the way one way. Notice that it's, about 90 degrees. Turn it the other way. It's a little bit past 90 degrees. We can try and lift this and move one spline, but it just moves it to the other side. So this is about as centered as we're gonna get. Using the supplied screw with the servo saver. This is an M3 by 14 screw. This comes in the servo saver packaging. We're gonna go ahead and install this now into the servo. All right, so the servo should move pretty freely. There shouldn't really be any binding or grinding. So that's the lower half of the suspension. Now we can start working on the upper half of the suspension. Included in the kit are 3 different upper control arms. And the difference between them are the degrees of caster. So you can see on this guy, there's a 7R. So that is 7 degrees of caster, and it is the right side arm. Included in the kit are 6 degrees of caster, 7 degrees of caster, and 8 degrees of caster. We're gonna go ahead and install 7 degrees of caster. That's been my go-to for probably the last 6 to 8 months. It's been, I think, the best of both worlds as far as straight line trackability and corner speed. Printed into the upper arm is a ball socket, so we don't necessarily have to use these red inserts. The ball is already printed into the upper arm. So to install these, we can go ahead and grab our metal plate, put a non-threaded ball on top, put the arm over and push down. All right, then you repeat that for the other arm. Okay, so with these upper arms, the ball fit is a bit harder to control because we don't have an insert. So in replacement of an insert, we have a screw here that can tighten or loosen the ball fitment. So this is an M2.5 by 12 socket head. These are the only M2.5 screws used in the kit. You're going to go ahead and thread these into the arm, and basically you're looking to close this gap. So the tighter the screw is, the more the gap is closed and the tighter the ball fit. So I basically go right to where the screw head is starting to touch the arm. I feel if the ball is loose or not. I give it a quick turn, quick turn. Once it starts to tighten up, I back it off just a little bit. So this ball should be fairly free. We've installed the screw. That's what's holding all this together in tension. And this arm is ready to mount to the chassis. So we can repeat the same thing with the other side. Check and see if it's loose. Tighten, tighten, tighten. That's starting to feel tight, so we'll back it off one. Cool, that's perfect. So now that we have the upper arms, we can go ahead and start installing these to the lower arm. To mount the upper arm to the lower arm, you need 4 M3x8 countersunk screws. And these countersunk screws are going to go in these 4 holes here. So you can put it through. You can grab your left side arm, which is 7L, and install these guys. One tip is I leave the upper arms loose until I get all of the steering block assemblies secured. This just gives me some extra room to move around and make sure everything is aligned properly before tightening everything down. Okay, so you can see here this arm is loose, this one is loose. That way it just gives me some room to get the steering block and everything installed. Which I guess we can do the steering block now. So steering blocks themselves are 3D printed aluminum. The axle itself is a steel ground screw with a shaft with no threading. The head on this screw is 3mm. So with the kit comes 4 5x10x4 bearings and then some axle shims. Essentially we use 3 axle shims per side, and this is to account for any variance in wheel geometry. So different wheels have different tolerances and different bearing offsets. So having these axle shims just allow us some compliance from wheel to wheel brand. When installing the wheels, the axle shouldn't be so tight that the wheel doesn't spin freely. And there should be almost like gear mesh where there's just a little bit of play left to right. Your axles shouldn't back out if there's enough play in the wheel assembly. So we can do 3 axle shims per side, 2 5x10x4 bearings per side, and we can tighten these guys down. And I do not run Loctite on these screws. I just make sure that they're tightened all the way down up against the aluminum, and I have not had any come out or back out. So then our kingpin, or our pivoting axis here, are two 3x30 flathead screws. These guys are just going to basically go straight up through the lower arm, through the upper arm, and the steering block will be in the middle. So first, we're going to need some spacers to space up the steering block. So I recommend starting with 4mm. This is just the plastic tree that's included in the kit. So the more spacers you add, the lower the ride height is going to be. The fewer spacers you have, the higher the ride height is going to be. Actually, first, before I install the steering block, I'm going to go ahead and get these two M3x36 screws started in the front of the steering block. Once everything's assembled, you're going to tighten these screws down up against the kingpin, and that's just going to secure everything in place. But it's easier if you get it started now and just have it ready to go. So with the front arm, you're going to go ahead and start and insert the M3x30 flathead through the lower arm. And then I like to put one 4mm thick spacer. You're going to go ahead and grab your steering block. You're going to assemble all of that together. I like to put my middle finger up against the end of the screw, my thumb and index finger holding the steering block, and then tightening this screw down. Okay, so you can see here that this guy is sort of just floating around. So you're going to put this into the upper arm pivot ball and tighten down your upper arm. Cool. So that is your steering block installed. And this should move relatively freely. So we can repeat the same process for the other side. So 3x30 flathead through the lower arm, add a 4mm spacer, add your 3D printed steering arm. So then we want to tighten down this M3x6 screw. I like to push down the screw and the steering block together. That way there's no gap on the lower arm assembly. So you can see here everything's tight, one piece. You then align the upper ball with the M3x30 screw and tighten down the upper arm. All right, and that's your front end. We can do steering blocks next. Okay, so we're getting closer. We're going to do steering links now. So left and right steering links are going to be the same. You're going to have a Traxxas 36mm tie rod, Traxxas ball cups. These two aluminum shims are included in the Traxxas tie rod set. You're going to have a couple non-threaded pivot balls, a couple bump stop spacers, and some M3x16 screws. So first things first, we can start assembling the steering links. So I just use like my turnbuckle wrench that has the appropriate size. Again, I will use some ceramic bearing oil. That just makes sure that after everything goes together, you can easily turn all this stuff. So I usually leave 4 or 5 threads exposed on this side. So you can see here, basically just leave 4 or 5 threads exposed on the one side, and then I'll repeat the same thing for this other side. Okay, and then once you have both of them installed like this, you want a 21mm gap between the two. So that's 22 1/4, so I need to tighten this down a bit more. First thing is you can look to see if there's any that are more exposed than others. So this one looks pretty even, but you can go ahead and turn, each one half a turn and then remeasure. So 21.5. Let's see, we can go a bit more. Go there and double check. So 21.1, that's good enough for now. So then we'll repeat the same process for this other one here. Okay, so now that these are both assembled, we can go ahead and put the outer sides will need, the steering block sides will need the open-ended ball. So I like to kind of lay everything out as it's going to be installed. This just helps me keep track of what goes where. Okay. So on these Traxxas tie rods, you can see there is a flat side and a coned side. You want both of those to face the same direction. Depending on your preference, it depends on how you want to tighten or loosen the tie rod to control the toe. I typically put the cone side to the passenger side. So to this side, I'll put the cone. And that's dictates basically where these balls go. So keeping everything in its correct orientation, we'll take the open non-threaded ball, and on the cone side insert this, and this is now going to be the passenger side tie rod. We'll take the other ball, and on the other end press in the ball so that this is now the driver tie rod side. So now these are basically ready to be put onto the car. First thing I would do is the tie rod end without the pivot ball. You can go ahead and mount to the servo saver now. So just like that. And you can do the same thing for the other side. So now the steering tie rods are ready to go onto the steering blocks. So to do that, we're going to take the M3x16 button head, put it through the non-threaded ball. We're going to take the 2mm aluminum shim, put it through the thread, and start installing the screw onto the steering block. I typically will get the thread started by hand here, just because you're sort of fighting different directions on things. Once it's started, I'll go. Okay, so now that we have a couple threads exposed here, we're going to go ahead and install Loctite and install the M3x10. It's a threaded spacer, but the way we're using it here is an overthrow protection. So we'll start just screwing all this together once it's screwed into the steering block, and tighten down. This guy will get threaded on and tighten down. And that's it. So essentially what this does is it prevents the steering block from overthrowing. It hits the lower arm. So that is the maximum amount of steering throw that you can have. And we'll repeat the same process for the other side. So we'll do screw through the non-threaded ball. We'll put the 2mm spacer on. So we'll get this hand started and start tightening down. Okay, and we can thread lock here. The exposed end of the screw, we'll put some thread lock on there. We'll take the other bump stop spacer and thread that guy down. Cool. So that's pretty much the front end complete for the ALF1’26. Everything's installed, it's ready to be put onto the chassis, and we can start finishing the car up.